Today or this evening, we are so excited to have with us Dr. Gillian Mandich. She is an award-winning, internationally recognized happiness researcher, speaker, educator, and author. With a PhD from Western University in Health Science, Gillian, Gillian is Gillian's area of research, sorry about that, is happiness and health. She is the founder of the International Happiness Institute in Health Science Research. She is the co-lead investigator of the Canadian Happiness at Work study and was recently named one of Canada's top 100 most powerful women. We are absolutely thrilled and honored to have Dr. Gillian Mandich with us this evening. Welcome, Gillian.
Thank you so much for having me. I am so grateful to be able to spend this time with all of you today talking about my favorite topic, which is happiness, which also makes me happy. So thank you for the opportunity to join you today.
Oh, you're welcome, and it is us who thanks you. So can you tell us a little bit about why you chose to study happiness?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. Sometimes I reflect back, how life goes, and sometimes things happen that you don't realize and dots connect later. I think about studying happiness, and it's not like when I was in high school, I sat down with my guidance counselor. I said, when I grow up, I want to study happiness. To be honest, I didn't even know that that was a thing you could study. I have always been passionate about health and wellness. I'm the oldest of 7 kids in my family. My mom is very, health conscious and health oriented. So I grew up with a mother that modeled health for me. And so I learned from a very young age to value health. And so my mom's also a researcher as well. And so I always thought my mom had a great job because she was home to go to my soccer games. And she also got to ask questions and think about things and try to figure out answers. And I'm a very curious person too. So I did my undergraduate degree at Western. So I'm from London, Ontario, in health science. And then I did a master's degree in health science as well. And I specialized in child and youth health, because I believe children are our future, right? And so what can we do to help support the next generation? And so I was actually doing a lot of work in childhood obesity. And so then after I finished my master's, I went right into my PhD at Western and was studying childhood obesity. And in your second year of university, you have to do what are called the comprehensive exams, which is the worst part of grad school. It's a very stressful time where you're given a topic and basically you have to read all the literature on it and then pass a written and an oral exam about it. And so the topic that I had was parent and family focused interventions to address childhood obesity, because they're much more effective when you involve the whole family in sort of a health promotion or a healthy behavior intervention. And so I was reading all the research on it, and I was looking, and so dropout rates are really high in childhood obesity studies for a variety of reasons. It takes a lot of time, it's a lot of work. And so not a lot of children even finish an obesity intervention. And then the other thing was, if you look at a 6 or 12-month follow-up, so after the study ends, looking back 6 or even a year later, pretty much the majority of the participants that actually do finish, so a very small percentage that actually finish, they basically go back to what they were doing before. So as soon as you remove the study, they go back to doing what they were doing before for the most part. And so I thought, why am I doing this for my study and for my research? And the other thing that really weighed heavy on me was because I have such a large family. At the time, I had just a few nieces and nephews. My family is much bigger now in terms of nieces and nephews, but at the time I had a couple, and they were not living with obesity. And so I thought, my research will never be able to help my nieces and nephews. And the other thing that weighed even heavier on me was I was using BMI, so body mass index, to determine if a child could be in my study. So in order to be in my study, a child had to have a BMI above the 85th percentile for their age and gender. So they had to, and BMI is calculated with height and weight. So essentially, I was using the number on a scale to determine if I could help a child. And that did not sit well with me, because you can be living with obesity and metabolically be healthy. And you can not be living with obesity and not be healthy, right? There's more to the story than that. There's more to the conversation. And so I was feeling, I was sort of having this like existential crisis 2 years into my PhD. Like, what am I doing? I was at Pilates one day, and where all good things happen at Pilates, right? And so I have my Pilates teacher had two reformers. And so the woman that was on the reformer beside me one day, I was talking about, how disheartened I was feeling about school. And she was a professor at Ivy, which is the business school at Western. She said, well, maybe you should switch to the business school, Gillian. We do have a health section here, and you seem pretty entrepreneurial. And then have you ever had it where like someone makes an off comment that like completely changes your life? So she said to me, she said, or why don't you look at my sister's research? She's at Acadia, so the university out on the east coast of Canada, and she studies sustainable happiness. And I thought, what's that? And I asked her, I said, what's sustainable happiness? And she said, go home and look it up. So I did. I went home, I went down the research rabbit hole, and I started reading all about happiness. And because I was in health science, I started reading research about how correlated happiness is with health. And I thought, wow, happiness. And when we focus on happiness, we're going after the same outcome, which is a healthier life, right? Except it's more inclusive. It has nothing to do with how much we weigh or a number on a scale. And so halfway through my PhD, I completely switched topics. I went from studying childhood obesity to studying happiness. It added an extra year to my studies because I had to basically restart everything. And to this day, I feel so grateful that I had that conversation because, and especially I think during the past 2 years when we've been experiencing mental health in a different way, to be able to be in a field, and it's a relatively new field, an emerging field, to be able to do things to boost our mental health and our happiness, and to be able to apply the rigor of scientific principles to happiness is a really cool thing and a really neat space to be in. So never planned it. Here I am, and I am so happy to be here.
Well, that's absolutely an amazing story. Maybe, you can introduce us a little bit to what you think is the definition of happiness.
Yes. So this is a great question because the other thing is, like when we started our chat today, right? I didn't have to explain what happiness is, if I studied it. It's not like I studied some technical thing where people don't know what it is. At the same time, if I was to ask, and actually, if you feel comfortable, do you want to put in the chat what you think happiness is? What does it mean to you? I'm curious just to see if anyone wants to share in the chat. I would love to see a few of you, if possible, sharing what happiness is to you. There's no right or wrong answer, by the way. This is not a trick question. Peace, yes. Being at peace, ooh. As those answers come in, I'll just tell you a really quick story. I just got back from Costa Rica. I was there. There is a university in Costa Rica called the University for Peace. And it was established in 1980 by the United Nations. And this entire university, the entire purpose of the university, they have master's and PhD programs, is to work towards peace. And every year they host what's called a Gross Global Happiness Summit. And I was there speaking, and we were having this conversation about happiness and peace. And these two are so connected and correlated. So I'm so happy to see that those are some of the answers that came up at the beginning. Well-being, fulfilled, highly energized, connected, feeling good inside, having joy. So thank you for sharing all of those things, because what's interesting is that happiness is a very personal thing, one, and then two, it's kind of like love in a way, where it's a feeling and it's hard to encapsulate it into words, right? So but then at the same time, this is a particular problem for me when I'm a happiness researcher, because at the beginning of any research study, you have to define the terms. You have to clearly articulate what it is that you're studying and what that is. And so with happiness, the definition that I use in my research, it actually comes from Dr. Sonia Lubomirski. She's a happiness researcher from California. And the definition is the experience of joy, contentment, and positive well-being combined with a sense that one's life is good, meaningful, and worthwhile. And there are a lot of definitions, and there isn't a right or wrong answer. And truly, it's a personal thing at the end of the day. The reason I use this particular definition in my research is I feel like it has range, right? It's a very broad, or sort of like an umbrella topic or a definition, because it's joy, contentment, or positive well-being, right? Because if you go into a yoga class and you leave your yoga class or meditation class, and you're feeling all zen and blissed out, you're quiet and you're serene, you're very peaceful, you're happy. If you turn on the Super Bowl and you watch someone get a touchdown and do the dance, end zone dance at the Super Bowl, they're happy too. Very different expressions, right? Same emotion. And
Jill,
then,
let me jump in and ask you, how do you measure happiness then?
ooh, I love it. Yes. So even beyond defining it, right, which we do, which I just did, what we know from research is that we're pretty good at self-reporting. So even right now, if I was to ask you, and if you're on the call right now, you can do this and just think, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, how happy am I? Like 1, I'm not happy at all. 10, I'm the happiest that I've ever been, right? So we can just take a second and just notice, right? No judgment, just awareness. So that is how I would just ask somebody. When I do research though, we use validated tools. So we use questionnaires to ask. So for example, there's one called the Oxford Happiness Inventory that was created at Oxford, or the Subjective Happiness Scale, which are questions, and then we score them, and then we get a number. And that number might be like 4.2, which doesn't really tell us anything, right? But what it does is when you measure it over time, you start to see if things change. And one of the things that's really interesting about measuring happiness is that what we know is that we're pretty good at self-reporting happiness. So even when I just asked you right now on that scale of 1 to 10, how happy are you? If I was to use one of the tools, the questionnaires that I use in my research, I would probably get a pretty similar answer. We're pretty good at figuring out how happy we are, of self-reporting our own happiness. And at the same time, what we also know from research is that we're not as good at figuring out what it is that makes us happy. And so that's where one of the gaps lies, because even though we can figure out how happy we are, we sometimes get confused or mudded in terms of what it is that really makes us happy.
Okay, thank you. I've read some of and I've also heard some of the interviews that you've done, and you make reference to that there's no secret to happiness, but there's a science to it.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just explain that a little bit further?
Yes. It's interesting. So when I tell someone I'm a happiness researcher, a lot of times what happens is I kind of get this like confused look. And like cartoons, how they draw like the thought bubbles and they have like their speech, right?
Absolutely.
I know that if that happened, their thought bubble would say like, is that a real thing? How do you study happiness, right? Because it's a newer field, one, in science, and two, it's just not that common. At the same time, the first question usually that people ask me when I tell them I'm a happiness researcher is they ask like, what's the one thing, right? Like, what's the magic pill? What's the one thing I need to do or buy or get or say in order to be happy? And the truth is there's no secret to happiness. There's no magic pill. If there was a magic pill, some drug company would be very rich right now and we would all be happy. So it doesn't work like that. At the same time, what we can do is just like we use scientific principles and the rigor of the scientific method to learn things about nutrition, to learn things about physical activity, to learn things about cancer, to learn things about anything that we want to know. We can apply those same principles to learn about what it is that makes us happy and what can we do to be happier. And so there's no secret, there's no magic pill. At the same time, we can be data driven and we can actually study what it is that makes us happy and figure out how do we cultivate more happiness in our life.
And I want to kind of segue a little bit and look at, how personality, there's a component of personality that psychology says is biological.
Mhm.
And I'd like to just sort of go to a poll that we created and get everybody's opinion on this question. So we're going to launch the poll now. And if you can just go to your computer and answer the question, that would be great. So I'm just waiting for our technical people from behind the scenes to launch the poll. All right, so it's launched. And I will not end up seeing the results of the poll, but we will now show you all the results of our poll. I understand some people are still trying to respond. So the question of the poll is, how much of happiness is basically biological? Let's see those answers. Can you all see the answers to that question? Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. So now we're going to actually talk about that. So, Gillian, I've read assorted studies that have specifically addressed this topic, and the number is anywhere between 40 and 50% that say happiness has a lot to do with your genes. How much of our happiness do you think is influenced by this?
Yeah, this is so you guys are smart there, right? We're looking here, 30% of you said about 50%, and so plus or minus a little bit, it's somewhere in that range. It's really hard to actually determine because it's not like our genes operate separately from our environment, right? Like our genes can be one thing, but our environment can affect gene expression. So it's not a very clear cut thing. But what we know is that there is a big part. If we think of like a pie, right? And the pie is our total capacity for happiness, then a big piece of that pie, about half-ish, is genetic. So we can thank our parents or not, but it does play a big role. At the same time, and if you're wondering, like, how do they even come up with that? How do they figure that out? Some of the really interesting studies that I've read are done with genetically identical twins that are separated at birth. So what happens is you have monozygotics, it's an egg that splits, so they have the same genes, and then they were raised in different environments. So when we start to have participants like that, we can start to tease things out. At the same time, it's very hard to control for life in a research study. So I think that, yes, genes play a role, and that's an important thing to know. And even more so than that, I think that it's important to know that our genes don't tell our entire story. There's two other big players in terms of this pie. So we have environment, which I think we can all appreciate how much our environment affects our happiness. Living through a pandemic when we can't go places and our environments are restricted, right? We understand how that affects us and how we feel. And then there's a third piece. And the third piece is the piece that my research focuses on, which is the piece that's really up to us, right? Because we can't control our genes, like maybe gene expression a little bit, but very difficult. I mean, to some extent, we can control our environment. Like we all could have got up and moved to Costa Rica when the pandemic happened. I had some friends that did that. And very difficult still, right? To change our environment. At the same time, this other piece, our thoughts, our actions, and our behaviors, that's something that we can focus on every single day to make meaningful change. So no matter what we were born with in terms of genetics, no matter where we live, our environment, there is still this other piece of our happiness, this big piece of the pie that's significant and that's meaningful and that is something that we can do something about. And so all of my research really
percentage
focuses
of the
on that.
pie is that though? If between 40 to 50%
So
is biological.
So Dr. Sunila Bamirsky, whose definition that I used at the beginning of happiness, she wrote a book called The How of Happiness. I think it's over, let me see if I can see it on my bookshelf. I don't see it. So basically on the front of the book, it's a yellow book, there's a piece of pie. And so when she published this book, she said 40%, or pardon me, 50% was genetics, 10% was environment, 40% was thoughts, actions, behaviors. Since that book has come out, and the way research goes, right, we're continually learning new things. Those numbers have been debated, let's say, in the research, because it's really hard to get a number like that. So those are like ballpark, we give some context, but again, there's a lot of individual variability. But from that work, we do know that a big piece of it, almost the same amount as our genetics, is up to us. And I find that empowering, right? Because that's the piece that we can do something about. And so to know that we can do something about that, but also have it be a big player in terms of our total capacity for happiness, to me, that's the exciting news from that study and the takeaway.
Yeah, I think that's amazing that although maybe half we don't have as much control over, there still is that other half that we absolutely do.
Exactly.
And that makes the work that you're doing so significant, because that's what we're going to start looking at a little bit, soon in this discussion, is how do we do that?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think it's also important for us to uh, to speak to the idea that many people experience some mental health difficulties and have a clinical diagnosis of of anxiety, depression, and when we're entering into this next phase where we're starting to talk about how do we actually learn to live more happy or practice happiness, I I don't want us to come across as um, further marginalizing this group of people, or making anybody feel that all you need to do is um, sort of just be happy, or just be positive, because in doing that, we're actually probably making people feel a little bit more insecure about being honest about their feeling. So, again, if somebody is suffering from or experiencing mental health issues, we are not necessarily speaking to you or blaming you or saying that this is going to be an absolutely easy thing or an easy transition for you to make. Would you like to speak further to that, Gillian?
Yes, please. I'm so grateful you brought this up because um, one, like we open up Instagram or Facebook and you see these like cute quote cards that say like, choose happy, right? It's not that easy. That's not how it works, right? It sounds good. It sounds like a cute little meme that we can share, but it doesn't work that way. So two things. One, when we look at biological determinants of happiness, and I get asked a lot about like pharmacological interventions, right? Like my best friend called me last week and she said, Gillian, I'm nervous to tell you something. And I said, okay, what? And she said, and she's a mom of three, who's been homeschooling this entire pandemic and has been really struggling. She said, I went to my doctor and I got put on an antidepressant. I'm scared to tell you. And I said, why are you scared to tell me? And she said, well, I feel like I'm not doing enough. And I said, no, I am so proud of you. I said, I fully support you. And I think what you did was brave and courageous, because everything that we talk about, when I talk about our thoughts, our actions, and our behaviors, that's a piece of it. But it's not enough sometimes. Like if you think about it, like I think about it like this. If we want to build a house, okay, so we're a builder and we want to build a house. So what do we need? We need all the things. We need bricks and we need cement and we need doors and we need windows. We need all the things for a house. And if we don't have any doors, guess what? We can't build our house. And so there is very much a biological piece to this conversation. If our body is not producing serotonin or the precursor to dopamine or the receptor that's supposed to receive that communication isn't working properly, then there is a time and a place for it. Absolutely. So that is an important piece of the conversation. And to know that those are really important conversations to have with our healthcare professionals, because there are times when our biology, no amount of gratitude or no amount of affirmation sometimes is going to get us to that place. If we don't have the building blocks to build the house, we can't build a house. So that's the first piece. The other piece, there's actually research, and it's called, sometimes in the scientific literature, it's referred to as like the dark side of happiness, where what we see is that people that prioritize happiness as their primary goal. So it's like they put their blinders on and they think, I want to be happy all the time. That is my goal. Those people are actually paradoxically less happy than other people. Now, when I first read that, I was like, okay, did I read that wrong? And you might be thinking, did I hear that wrong? And no, because what happens is it is impossible to be happy all of the time. Okay. So if we set the goal to be happy all the time, what have we done? We have set an impossible goal. We are never going to be happy all the time. And so what happens when we don't reach a goal, right? We start to feel down on ourselves. We start to feel discouraged. We start to feel like we're doing something wrong, like we're not good enough, whatever narrative we want to tell about why we're not reaching that goal. And so we can become less happy. And so I think that knowing that, and do we need to prioritize positivity? Do we need to add more things into our life to be happy? Yes. At the same time, we need to give ourselves the grace to understand that we can't be happy all the time. And this is really important, because on days that we are not feeling happy, and we all have them, myself included, I'm a happiness researcher, I'm not happy all the time. When we have those days, if we feel like we should, or we're supposed to be feeling happy, it can actually make us feel worse, right? Because what we are feeling and how the narrative of what we think we're supposed to be feeling don't match. And so knowing that and giving ourselves the grace, and a lot of work from Dr. Susan David. She talks about this idea that it's actually normal, healthy, and a good thing to experience the full range of human emotions, right? It's not about not feeling hard things or not going through sad things. It's really about embracing it. It's kind of like, I think about life sort of like a sheet of music. Okay. So if you look at a sheet of music, right, it's got high notes, it's got low notes, it's got spaces, the whole thing. If we just had a sheet of music that played one high note, one, say, happy note all the time, it doesn't even sound good, right? It's like one long continuous tone. That doesn't sound good. And when we look at the entire symphony of our life, we have difficult things that happen to us, right? Like life is not always easy. And part of the beauty of it is also the resilience that we have, or the what we learn when we go through hard times. And collectively, all of the notes, the high notes, the low notes, that's what makes a beautiful sound. That's what makes a beautiful song, right? Like that's beautiful music. And it's a good analogy for us to keep in mind, because if we're having a day when we're playing a low note, when we're having a sad day, a difficult day, an anxiety provoking day, or whatever, it also reminds us that that note isn't forever, right? Things change, emotions change, they come and they go. Happiness is the same. It comes and it goes, just like everything else. So giving ourselves that grace to know that, one, if we aren't feeling like we're happy and we feel like something's off, we can have a conversation with our doctor or healthcare professional. And then two, knowing that the goal isn't to be happy all the time. And when we can actually open up to the full spectrum of the human emotions, that's when we can really live the human experience.
That's beautifully said. You know, I think that in the cancer wellness world, or in the world of anybody experiencing anything difficult, there seems to be this incredible pressure or push to be positive. And if you're positive, then you will heal and you will survive whatever is ahead of you. And it's actually a really big pet peeve of mine, because you can't just always be positive. You can't just land at positivity. You have to be able to be given the opportunity to get to positivity. In getting there, you have to, as you say, live those emotions. So I really very much appreciate you making that distinction there for us. So it's a beautiful segue at this point for us to actually look at the idea of how do we become happier, or what are some of the tricks that we need to do to make happiness a little bit more evident in our lives. And before we jump into it, we're going to go to our second poll. And the question of this poll is, how many of you have ever said, and I quote, "I will be happy when," so that could be, I will be happy when my children move out of the house. I'll be happy when I win $1 million. I'll be happy when I stop X or I do Y. So the question is, how many of you have ever said that to yourself? All right, I don't see the results again, so if somebody can present me those results.
We're 75 yes, 25 no.
So 75%. So I think what we're seeing here is that 75% of our population, which is probably true of most, have this idea of, when I get something or when something happens, I'll be happy. I will finally get to the place of happiness. But Gillian, you've mentioned that happiness is actually not a destination, but it's a practice. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. And if I was voting in this poll, I many times have said I will be happy when, even when I first started studying happiness, in all honesty, I thought that I wanted to study happiness to figure out how I could be happy all the time, right? I was like, you're a researcher, so figure this out. And I thought, okay, well, one day when I finish my PhD, I will be happy. And then I was like, hold on a second. There is a big problem with this, because happiness is not a destination. You're reading this literature about it. And yet the narrative that I still had in my head was that one day when I finish school, then I would be happy. And part of this is not my fault. And it's not our fault if we do think that, because think about when we grew up, right? Did anybody here take a class on happiness in school? Probably not, right? We learned math, we learned science, we learned history, we learned geography. We're not taught how to be happy. And so then not only that, but then add to that the fact that we have marketing, advertising, media, social media, TV, movies that are all telling us that happiness is, fancy cars, big houses, all of these things, trips, whatever it is. So part of it's not our fault because we were never taught, right? And so when we think about happiness, though, we don't arrive at happiness, right? We don't one day achieve happiness like I achieved a PhD and then you just put it on your wall and you move on, right? That's not how it works. Happiness is not something that we get and then we have for the rest of our life. It's a practice. And so I think that one of the key things about happiness is recognizing that our happiness is something that we have to work at. It's a practice. It's something that if we want to live a happy life, we have to do things on a regular basis for our entire life to be happy. It's kind of like, I sort of think about happiness the same way that I think about fitness and nutrition. And what I mean by that is that, say, for example, I made a green smoothie for you today and I put like all the superfoods in this green smoothie and I gave it to you. And I said, here you go. And you drank it. And you're like, this was so delicious, Gillian. Thank you. I've reached nutritional wellness. I just had a super healthy meal. I don't have to eat again. Right? That sounds silly to even say. We understand that if we want to be healthy, what do we have to do? Eat healthy food most of the time. Or same with fitness, right? Like you would never go into the gym and have the best workout of your life and leave the gym and call your friend or your partner or whoever and say, I just had the best workout of my life. I've reached fitness, right? I don't have to exercise anymore. I've reached fitness, right? That's not how it works. We understand that if we want to be healthy, what do we have to do? We have to move our bodies, whether it's gym, whether it's walking, whether it's swimming, whatever it is, something to move our body on a regular basis. So I think with happiness, it's kind of the same thing where if we can see happiness through the lens that we see nutrition or that we see movement, physical activity, exercise, it changes things. Because now happiness is not something that we will find one day, right? That's like chasing a mirage. It's not real. But when we can see happiness as a practice, something that we have to work on, then the plus of that becomes that it becomes something that's available to me today because I can start to think, okay, well, what makes me happy? And when we start to unpack that question, then we realize that we often think that, I told us earlier how we're pretty good at assessing how happy we are, right? When I asked that scale of 1 to 10, and I said that we're pretty good at self-reporting our happiness. And I also said that one of the things we're not as good at is figuring out what it is that makes us happy. So what we know is that we often think it's the big shiny moments, right? It's the graduations, it's the birthdays, it's the holidays, it's the vacations that bring us the most amount of happiness. When in actuality, when we look at actually what creates a happy life, it's about creating a day that we have small bursts of joy. So it's not about those big moments because one, what we know is that the happiness that we anticipate, let's say we're planning a vacation. We think about it, we anticipate that we're going to be really happy. We don't actually get as much happiness and it doesn't last as long as we think it does. So sometimes our brain plays tricks on us, right? And that's a great example of that. At the same time, if we look at our day and I think, okay, what can I do throughout my day to day to bring small bursts of joy? Little things. And when I say little, I mean little in terms of time. The impact is quite large. That's what actually adds up to a happy life. And what's even more exciting about this concept is that then what we can do is happiness is not contingent on something external in the future. It's something that we can actually do something about today. So when I say that happiness is not a destination, it's a practice, what I mean is that really stopping to think about, let's look at my day. And what is 1 or 2 things that I can do? That's a great place to start to bring more joy to me. Like for example, I have a sleeping puppy beside me on the floor, by the way. He's a little French bulldog. His name is Jocko. He's snoring. So by the way, if you hear snoring in the background of any of my talk, I'm not putting myself to sleep. It's just my dog snoring. But after we're done the Zoom today, I'm going to go take my puppy out for a walk. And that's something that I love to do because 1, it's nice to get out for a walk. 2, he's really playful and he loves playing outside and it makes me laugh to watch him play and watch outside. So that's something that's a small burst of joy. That's going to take me 15 minutes and it's going to start to shift my mood. And it might seem like a very small thing, but if you actually add up those small moments, it adds up to more happiness than that week-long vacation. So really sort of remembering and reminding ourselves that it's a practice. And the other good thing about it being a practice is that it's not permanent, right? It's not something that we get and then we have it. because that's not how it works, like I said earlier. So when we can sort of shift the narrative and shift the lens that we see happiness, and so instead asking, where are some areas of opportunity? What do I actually do? What makes me happy? What can I do in my day to day to bring me those small bursts of joy? Because what happens when we do that is it creates what we call in research like upward spirals of positive emotion. So I think we all know what an anxiety spiral is. Yes, right? The negative spiral where we have one bad thought and then all of a sudden the world's ending, right? The opposite can also happen where we do one good thing. It's like if you received a text message today from a friend that gave you a compliment, what happens? You might smile. You might be nicer to the person that you send the next email to, or the person in the checkout line if you're in the grocery store, whatever it is. That is the spiral the other way. And so really reminding ourselves of that and contextualizing that, it allows happiness to be something that we can create today. And I think that that's an important piece of the happiness conversation.
So if we could implement a little bit more joy in our lives, you're saying that ultimately it'll help us to have that happiness spiral upwards. But what also can you tell us about fun and play? Does that also have an important role in our practice of happiness?
Yes, big time. One of the things that I think is so beautiful about children is we watch them, right? And they're so innocent, and we watch what they do. And what do? They play and they have fun and they smile and they laugh and they do silly things. And then what happens is we grow up and we stop doing those things, and for a variety of reasons, but we often lose that. And I think that bringing play and fun into our life is the secret sauce of life, right? Like those are the things that we remember. That's the enjoyment of life, like really. It's so clear, and there's so much research that really shows how important play, laughter, joy, fun is. And even think about it. Think about the last thing that you did where you had fun, right? Whatever it is. When I was in Costa Rica, I was at a conference I was telling you about, but I had one day between when the conference ended and when I flew back to a snowstorm. And so I'm in Costa Rica and I thought, what am I going to do in this day? And I'm a couple of the girls that I met at the conference, they said, we're going ziplining. And I was like, oh, okay. So I went with them ziplining, and we were going through the jungle in these zip lines. And we were like, when you go down the zip line, like we were like screaming, like at the top of our lungs and laughing. And I was like, I don't remember the last time I laughed like that. And I'm a happiness researcher too. Like I know this. So, context, it's a practice, right? Even myself, right? We're always practicing this. But at the end of the day, I remember sitting in my hotel room when I went back. I was sunburnt because I forgot to put sunscreen on, and I was tired and I was dirty, and I was so happy because I had fun. I played. So thinking about for ourselves, when's the last time I did something like that? And as silly as it might seem, it's really profound. And there's so much data to back that up, that creating opportunities for fun, for laughter, for play, even if it's watching a funny video or like a comedy special on Netflix, having that laughter, that joy is a really critical element to not only our happiness, but also our quality of life, and our experience of life. And so, yes, such a big piece.
And I think that, in this day and age, especially because we've been, isolated due to the pandemic, and we've been, now we're being inundated with all this really negative news, and that we also have, potential addictions to our technologies.
Mm-hmm.
I would figure that, above all, and probably our first step is to intentionally turn away the negative, is to put the phone away, or to stop reading the news for a bit, because with all that negativity coming at us on a regular basis, I wonder how powerful, one moment of joy would be. Like, I would think that we might need to do a little bit more when we're in these, or when we've been diagnosed, for example, with cancer, or have a life altering experience.
Mm-hmm.
I would figure that we would have to do just a little bit more to practice happiness. Would you
Yeah.
agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And like one moment is not changing our life, right? Like that's a thing. And I think sometimes we want to cling to certainty, right? We want to think, okay, if I do this, then I'll be happy, then I'll be good. But that's not how life works. And I think sometimes we also think that life is easy, but the reality is it's not, right? We have hard things that happen in life, whether it be a job loss, a pandemic, a divorce, a cancer diagnosis, a health issue with someone in our family, anything. So we all experience hard things. It's not about not having them, but it's also recognizing there's no band-aid for that, right? Like, I think part of the challenge with happiness is that it's marketed to us as this panacea that life is great. And actually, I think about happiness like a muscle. Okay. So if you want to get strong, right, you got to go to the gym, you got to exercise, you have to lift weights. And what happens over time, your muscles get stronger. I think about happiness the same way. All of these small bursts of joy, it's not a panacea, but what it's doing is it's helping to build our muscle. And then when a difficult thing happens in our life, which it will inevitably, that's life. When we have a stronger muscle, what happens is we are in a better place to cope with whatever happened, right? We are able to be more resilient. Resilience and happiness are highly correlated. So the more resilient we are, the happier we tend to be. And what happens is as we start to grow our happiness muscle, if we think about like a chart, right, with the line going up, what happens is as we grow the muscle, our highs get higher, right? We get happier, but we also still have lows. They don't go away, right? Like part of, like I talked about, was that hard things happen, right? It's not about not having them, but what happens is our highs get higher, right? We get happier, but our lows get higher too. So we are better equipped to handle these things when they come. It's not to say that they're going to be easy. It's not to say that they're not going to happen. I don't want to paint a picture of that because that's not life. Nobody tells us this, but that's true, right? And I'm just reading in the comments here, and Rose is saying here, Rosemarie is saying, my home is in no news zone at the moment. And I am so happy you shared that because this is something that is really important. So research from Sean Aker and Michelle Gillian, they found that watching just 3 minutes, okay, 3 minutes of news that we perceive to be negative in the morning, so bad, scary, whatever, news in the morning, we have a 27% greater likelihood of reporting our day as unhappy 6 to 8 hours later. 6 to 8 hours later, 3 minutes that we saw in the morning. So this is an important piece of the conversation as well, because our environment matters, right? We talked about how there's genetics, environment, and thoughts, actions, behavior. Environment is a big piece too. And environment, I don't just mean turning on CNN. It's also, who are we talking to? What shows are we watching? What audiobooks are we listening to? What podcasts are we listening to? Who are we talking to? What are we talking about, right? Am I gossiping and complaining? Or am I talking about good things? All of these things contribute to our environment, and they really do affect our mood. And I think to remind ourselves that, I have an aunt that plays CNN 24/7 at her house. And I get so stressed out when I go there because it's on in the background. She's like, oh, honey, it's just on in the background. I'm like, no, it's like when you're driving in your car, what are you listening to, right? It's knowing that not only does it affect us in the moment, but the residue of that can extend to our day, 6 to 8 hours. So this is something that we can all do, right? We can become more intentional about creating that environment. And I'm also not saying like, pretend like nothing's going on in the world and don't check in. What I'm saying is we create boundaries around it. We need to know what's going on. We need to stay informed, and we don't need to be informed right before bedtime or first thing in the morning when we wake up, right? We can protect some of that time, and we can check in and then stop. If we start feeling anxious, if we start feeling fear, if we start feeling overwhelmed, it's time to turn it off. And this is something that I think is so important for us. And thank you, Rosemary, for bringing this up, because it's a really powerful thing. It's something that we don't necessarily pay attention to all the time. And yet in terms of our happiness, it's something that really, really does impact our happiness, our mental health.
Yes, that's an excellent point. Maybe just because I'm a little bit weary of our time, maybe we could just touch on a little bit about the role that both gratitude and compassion has on our happiness and our practice of happiness.
Yes, we absolutely can. So when I did my PhD study, I worked with undergraduate students at Western. And what we did for my study was they watched videos. This is before the pandemic. They watched videos. And every week they learned skills that were highly correlated with happiness. So things like mindfulness, compassion, social connection, all sorts of different things, building relationships. And at the end of the study, I did focus groups, interviews with the students. And I said, what was your favorite thing you learned out of all the tools and strategies? And by far, the number one tool that they said was gratitude. And what I mean by practicing gratitude is taking time, ideally every day, to think about things that we're grateful for, thankful for, things that we appreciate in our life. And it doesn't sound like a lot, right? And it doesn't take a lot of time. It doesn't cost anything, and it can be done anywhere. So it's a really profound practice that has a low barrier to entry. And yet what happens and what we see in research is that over time, when we start to see things through a grateful lens, it changes our view of the world. So it's not just like one day you don't practice gratitude and then all of a sudden you have a gratitude journal and you write in your journal and then all of a sudden you're a grateful human, right? It doesn't work like that. But what happens is over time, things start to change. It's kind of like, I think about, do you remember when you got your first smartphone, like your first camera phone, right? And I remember I think it was a BlackBerry, but I used to take pictures of everything. And I thought it was the coolest thing. And yet if I was to look back at a picture that I took on my first BlackBerry to the picture that I have on my new iPhone, a lot has changed, right? The colors are sharper right? Our cameras are better. The lighting is better. The flash is better. The colors are more vivid. The image is sharper. It's in like 4K high definition now. This is how gratitude works. It's something that is a slow cumulative change in how we see the world. And so when you think about practicing gratitude, thinking about things that you're grateful for is good. And in a best case scenario, we actually take time every day to write them down. If you go into any bookstore, there is like an entire section of the bookstore now that has gratitude journals. So you can get one of those. Or you can take out a piece of paper, take out a blank journal, and just every day write down some things that you're grateful for. That's it. And the nice thing about a journal is you could put it, like, say, for example, beside your bedstand. And so you see it there because habit formation is an important part of this. And so having that visual reminder of the gratitude journal is really important. And so much so that there's actually one of my favorite research studies looked at two groups of people. So the first group was people that won the lottery. And I think we can all agree, you can put yes in the chat if you agree. Would you be happy if you won the lottery today? What do you think? Would you be happy if you won the lottery today? Let's see. Who would be happy if they won the lottery? I would. Yes, right? So the researchers studied people that won the lottery. And yes, thank you, Christine. Not surprising. They found that people that won the lottery were happy. But then what they did was they followed those same winners for 6 months and they kept measuring their happiness. And over the 6 months, their happiness started to drop. And if you think, yes, Anne, exactly, for the moment, because what happens, think about it. If you win the lottery today and you hit fast forward on your life and you go to 2 months later, let's say, are you waking up and getting out of bed and being like, oh my goodness, I'm so happy, I just won the lottery? No, right? We adapt. We're adaptive creatures. So that was one part of the study. The second part was they found people that did not win the lottery, so non-lottery winners, and they asked them to practice gratitude. And they gave them an exercise called 3 great things. So every single day they had to write down 3 great things. And so at the beginning of the study, they weren't that happy, but they also followed them for 6 months. And what they found was at the end of the 6 months, the people that practiced gratitude were statistically significantly happier than the people that won the lottery. And so I think about, there's a lot in our life that we can't control, right? And there is some things we can control. And one of those things is, am I taking 3-5 minutes every day to write down 3 great things or to think about things that I'm grateful for? And when we do that, we can actually remind ourselves that we would be happier. We are happier than if we won the lottery. So it's not an overnight thing. And yet if you commit to it and you practice it, just like happiness is a practice, gratitude is a practice. And over time, it really, truly does shift how we see the world. And then the compassion piece, that's another really big one. Self-compassion in particular is highly correlated with happiness, because I just think about, there's so many hard things that we have in our life and in the world, right? Especially right now in the world, what is going on is terrible and scary. And it might be the case in our life as well, or the life of people that we care about. Giving ourselves compassion and grace to feel what we're feeling, right? To, like I said earlier, to not, if we're not feeling happy, to give ourselves the permission to not feel happy, to, if we aren't doing everything, especially the pandemic, right? Like, you know, at the beginning, how everybody was like making sourdough bread and like exercising with their soup cans, right? And then it went on and we stopped doing those things. And we felt like we should be doing these things, but we're tired and we're burnt out. Giving ourselves permission to be a human, to feel how we're feeling. And if we're feeling like we don't want to do that today, then giving yourself that permission and having that compassion to allow us to do the best that we can with what we have when we can, and to not try to put unrealistic expectations on us is also a really important factor in terms of thinking about our happiness.
So if you were to sort of summarize everything that you've put out to us today, what would be your final statements that would you make to us?
I think that as a happiness researcher, and I try all of the things that I do, right? And I'm not happy all the time, just to be clear, we talked about this, right? Giving ourselves the grace to show up for our life, and also to be a human, right? To know that there are things we can do. And I'm seeing that Jessica Marie is asking for specific tools, right? So incorporating that, knowing that it's not about what we're born with or not, right? We have some control. So doing that and doing the best that we can with what we have, right? So if some days we're not having a good day, giving ourselves permission to do that. But in terms of actual tools, gratitude, like I talked about, is a big one. Another really big one is meditation and breath work. So whether it be an app or things like that, that's something that's really powerful. The other thing that we are actually all doing right now, and research out of Harvard has actually found that the number one predictor of both our long-term health and our happiness is social connection. So above how much money we have, above our gender, above our race, above health status, above jobs, above any of those things, the number one thing that predicts both our long-term health and our happiness is social connection. So what I mean by that is having at least one person in our life that when we're having a hard day, we can go and confide in them, and vice versa. And so prioritizing relationships, because I think sometimes when life gets busy, the first thing that can drop off of our list is dinner with a friend, calling a friend. And so reminding ourselves that that's something we can really all do. And even, especially when you're going through a really difficult time, there's nothing that we can do to change the difficult time. But when you go through it and you know you're not alone, or you've talked to somebody that's gone through something similar, it doesn't change what's happening, but what it does is it makes it a little bit more bearable. And so having that connection, having those people, prioritizing those relationships is something that is really critical as well.
Okay, I was just taking an extra little peek at some of the questions here, and
I know there's so many.
I know, and it's unfortunate that we only have an hour with you, Gillian, because you are such a fantastic speaker, and you've shared so much knowledge with us. And if I could maybe just sort of summarize it from my perspective is, what I'm understanding is that we need to be kind to ourselves and allow ourselves to experience whatever we're experiencing, be it sadness, be it fear. And then maybe we can find the connectivity of others to be able to talk that through so that we can actually get to the point where we can start to feel a little bit better. Mm-hmm. And then when we are there, to practice joy, to practice gratitude, to have fun, to blare the music and the house and dance like nobody's ever watched you before. And then also to experience compassion and to be kind to both yourself and others. Mm-hmm. Seem to be some of the highlights that I've taken from today's talk. So on having said that, I would like to thank you from the bottom of our hearts on behalf of the entire team at the West Island Cancer Wellness Center, and also from everybody who's saying thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you in the chats. This has been absolutely amazing. We invite you to come back and talk to us again in the near future. And for those of you who are with us today, we will be taking this video and putting it up on our website. So we'll let you know when it's there, and you can come back and be happy watching it over and over again. So I wish everybody a good night. And again, thank you very much, Gillian, for your time.